Hey guys, Joe Pye here at Advanced Innovations. Welcome back. Today we're going to put another project on your to-do list. This is a small attachment that I need once in a while that I do not have, and I figured, you know what, might make a good interim video while I'm doing the engine lathe miniature. Drill chuck. Let's start off with the drill chuck. Find the max diameter you can hold in that drill chuck with the jaws subsurface. There will be one. So figure out what diameter that is and write that down somewhere. That's part one. Part two is grab a piece of material off the stock, cold roll, brass, it really doesn't matter. But if you can, make sure it's bigger than this opening right here. Just a little bit. Doesn't even have to be a whole lot bigger, just a little bit bigger. I have been fortunate enough to collect a lot of bearings along the way, and I've decided to grab a couple out of it and use those for today's project. And I'm going to use two for a very specific reason that I'll go over in a little bit. Also figure out what the diameter is of that. A nice working fit. There will be no formal blueprints for this. I'm just going to sketch this up real quick on a pad, take a couple of numbers down, grab a collet, hit the lathe. Let's make it happen. For all you guys that are buried in snow and need something to do, this is for you. The very first part of this assembly that we're going to do is the main body. And this particular diameter that I am turning is the diameter that we established was the largest gripping diameter that the chuck would grab with the jaws subsurface. If you are going to take a large, difficult material, and this is 316L stainless, so there's a little bit of resistance on this particular insert. Do yourself a favor and make your first pass, once you face it off, take it to the full length that you are going to take it to. That is a visual indicator if the material starts to migrate into the collet. As you hit the number for each pass, you will notice that the material has moved into the collet. If you have that issue, dust a couple thousandths off the face of the part and continue the part. Make sure that if you are going to measure any part that has a critical diameter, after this much amount of material being removed, that the material is cool. So check it, but don't burn yourself. This particular diameter is not a critical diameter. I'm sure a couple of thousandths either way is going to be fine. 390 was the number I was looking for, but I hit 393.7, and for some reason I started to tingle when that number happened, so I just had to take the extra 3 thousandths off. Deburr it, make it clean, take the burrs off with a piece of emery, watch your fingers, check the temperature, and once everything is good, move it out, and let's part the thing off to a reasonable working length. Put the smaller collet in there and now hold the blank reversed. I am now clamping this part on the diameter that we just turned. I'm going to face it off. And then we're going to center drill it, and bore it. So this is the initial operation right here. We're going to center drill it. I'm being real delicate here. 316 will just grab in a heartbeat and snap your center drill off. And I've always noticed that it just seems to cut better once the larger diameter engages. I put a 3/16 hole in this about 1 inch deep, and from there we put a 1/2 inch drill in it to 625 deep, and then continued with a boring bar for the final operation. Once you put a boring bar in after a drilled hole, keep in mind that as you get closer to your final depth, don't worry, or you better worry about the drill point at the bottom of the hole, because the load on the tool is going to increase tremendously. So start with your boring bar centered as much as possible. Don't worry about what kind of chip you're floating out of there. Make sure that the tool itself is on center as you go in. And for this operation, we want the very center to be deeper than the edges anyway, because this bore needs to locate the edge of the bearing and not the center. We want the center race to go free. This is a very light press fit, so I'm going for about a 1/2 thousandths press fit on the bearing. The bearing itself is 625, 5/8 imperial, and I want about 5/10 thousandths of an inch press fit. And that can be a thermal difference too, so check the temperature on this, make sure it's not too hot. If it's really hot, as it cools down, that press fit will get extremely tight, and that's not what you want. And just out of habit, I always check both ends of my pin in case the person before me that used it dropped it and there's a burr.
That's a nice fit.
And anytime you see the coolant purge out of the hole like that, you know you got a pretty good fit.
Don't ever leave the pin in while the part is hot and walk away. You're going to come back to one piece. I've seen it happen. That is an embarrassing problem. It's also a great trick to play on an apprentice. They can bore something out real tight. Make sure it's hot. Tell them to go get a coffee or something. Actually, that's me. Don't do that. But hypothetically, I may have done that to somebody. I'm looking for about a 1/2 thousandths press fit on this bushing, and unfortunately, I do not have 1/2 thousandths pins. So I'm just looking for this to just start. I'm going to risk it. Leave it right there. Okay, I'm going to turn down a little bit, give myself some room on the front. Move on.
When the time comes that you use this little attachment, you're going to want all the room that you can spare. So along with a thinner wall expanding and accepting a press fit easier than a thicker wall, make sure that when you neck this down, leave a little shoulder on there to bump against the face of the drill chuck you're going to stick it in, and leave enough material to keep it rigid and functional. The pocket that we just bored in the body is going to accept 2 bearings, so make a bushing that goes in between whatever the bearings are that keep the bearings separated in that pocket. A nice loose fit is all you need, just something to get in between the bearings, locating on the outer race, and that is all you want it to locate on. You're going to center drill it and drill the center out of it. This particular hole going through here only needs to clear the ID of the 2 races. Make sure that this is bigger than the inner race on the bearing that you've selected. Using my razor blade trick to locate the parting tool, I'm going to slip in there and I'm going to part just barely through the part, run away and get a file and come on back and break the back edge so I don't have to re-chuck this. And once it falls off, you're basically done. Make sure there's no big ugly hanger in there and you're good to go. This particular diameter that I'm shooting for right here is the inner diameter of the 2 bearings that I elected to use. So whatever you pick, whatever bearing you buy, whatever bearing you have, make sure this particular diameter is a nice slip fit in that dimension. And beware of the heat. This is 17-4 stainless, so I can heat treat it. And I can tell you that that's plenty hot. Adjust this particular stem diameter so that it is a nice slip fit to the ID of the bearings. Make sure it is no longer than the 2 bearings and the collar combined. And then put a little step on it right there. That assures that this does not engage the outer race of the stack of the bearings. And we'll show this at assembly. Deburr everything. advance the material somewhat after the fact, and then we're going to back part this so that I don't have to stress that small diameter once we spin this around and start cutting it off. This is just a courtesy cut, so I do not have to stress that 1/4 inch diameter when this is turned around, because that's exactly what I'm going to do. Whatever happens from this point on is personal preference, but I know that this is going to be a pressure center, and off it comes. Quarter inch diameter collet in the machine right now. The part has been reversed, and I am just going to clean up the face and the diameter that I just turned with the parting tool. So the facing operation and a nice cleanup cut. Chamfer it, a little bit of emery, and off to the bench we go. This part is done.
Let's take a look at the parts and the logic behind them. First thing is the body. The body has a recess in the bottom that assures that when you press one of these bearings in, that the center does not rub the bottom. It's got to be clear. Okay? The bushing is strictly a bearing spacer and should also be cleared in the center for the same reason. You don't want the spacer to hit the inner race of the bearing, and you don't want it to be too tight going in here. So slip fit going in there is fine. The nose can be any configuration you want. This is a bull nose just for pressure turning, and at a later date, if you wanted to ream this out and put a hard 60-degree center in the center of this and use it as a dual purpose or make multiples of these, you could do so. The back has a step on it to assure that it doesn't bottom out on the outer race, and it only locates on the inner race. I want to push this hole all the way through at a later time so that if for any reason the center gets stuck, you can drive it out from behind. And the body itself is large enough. Off camera, here we go. So you can stick it in your chuck and it'll register against the face of the chuck and not against the jaws. So let's put this thing together real quick and give it a go.
First step in the assembly is to push the bottom bearing into the body. I'm going to locate the body against the stationary jaw, and this allows the movable jaw to align the initial bearing to go in. Don't line up on that bearing and try to push it the other way. It could gall everything up. Knowing that the bearing is true, I'm going to bump the spacer to push the first bearing deeper into the body. Make sure it's all the way down. Just like that. They should be flush. Third step is to take the second bearing and just bump it right now. Look for it, because if you're off center, you're going to start to drag the sides of the body. You don't want to do that. Bump it until you know it's going to locate, and then flip it around and sink it home. This is going to squeeze both bearings against that spacer and give you a nice registration on all. Now you can't tell that's spinning, but it is. So let's put a little black dot on it and spin it again. Check this out. Done. Put it in the machine and play with it. This particular little attachment will act as a driving live center. You could use it as a center, you could use it as a pressure center, but it's going to keep you from digging into your checkbook and waiting for the UPS guy to drop off something. And it's a great project. Take you a couple hours to make one of these. Make the tip however you need to make it to suit your application. Put a point on it, put a cup on it, use a flat nose like this one is right here, and it's seconds in between setups. You don't have to use a much larger piece of material. You don't have to worry about setting your compound for Morse tapers, and it's in and out and it's done. So it's a great little attachment to have, and I actually have a couple of these. I think it's plenty clear to see the utility of something like this. Turns your drill chuck into a live center pretty quick without goofing around, and the bearings are probably relatively inexpensive. And I'll tell you, when there's no other way to hold a piece or make a part that's going to be difficult, pressure turning it against a solid object is the way to go. Make sure you use 2 bearings if you do this. 2 will maintain an axial alignment. 1, it can still whip a little bit. Make sure that you follow the guidelines that I laid out when I showed you the assembly and the parts on the bench. That way it will be the most rigid and do the least amount of damage to the chuck you use it in. I do appreciate you watching. Stay well. It's Joe Pye, Advanced Innovations in Austin, Texas. I'm out. And a quickie announcement for anybody that hung in all the way to the end of the video. The new shirts are on the website. I am very pleased with these. This is a nice 3-color back. White company logo on the front, available in gray, black, and royal blue. Get them while they last. And thank you to everyone that has already purchased. They are flying out the door. Take care.